Hello whisky fans, today I'm going to be taking a look at something that I've been trying to get a hold of for quite a while, because whenever it's released it tends to sell out really fast, like Ficila fast, and that probably tells you something. Another reason why I've been so eager to get hold of this whisky is because it's an English whisky, and I do like my English whiskies. Whenever I get hold of a new English whisky, there's always two things that I ask. First is, what's it like? And the second is, how does it compare to the English Whisky Company? Because that is my local distillery. This is a review of Bimber ex-bourbon cask batch number 2. So the Bimber Distillery was founded in 2016 in West London, so they've not been around for very long at all. Sort of 4 years, it's the sort of time that a lot of distilleries, they might still be relying on a lot of revenue from making gin, or if they are making whisky, quite often it's quite young, quite rough stuff. But Bimber Distillery, as I said before, everything they release sells out pretty much instantly, and everything that I've heard online is always really, really positive. So a little bit of information about the Bimber Distillery themselves. It is an English whisky, and they actually style themselves on their branding as single malt London whisky. Their whisky is made from English barley, and it's English barley that is floor malted in Wiltshire. So it's not actually floor malted on site at the distillery, but it is done the proper traditional way. And that barley, once it's been floor malted, goes to the Bimber Distillery, where it's mashed and fermented in Bimber's own traditional wooden washbacks. So already we're getting the sense that Bimber is a company that's committed to doing things the right way and also in a traditional way. I will also say that it doesn't really matter in any way, but I really like their branding. I think they've done a really good job of presenting their whisky in this really nice paper and charcoal and gold accented tube. The branding on there with I believe that's an eagle's head, kind of reminds me a little bit of the Isle of Arran distillery, or perhaps Annoch, Knockdhu. And I also can't help but mention the actual branding of the bottle, again with this sort of textured paper label with the chocolate charcoal 2-part label at the bottom and the gold accents, is particularly striking. But it does look a lot like something else. I don't know if that's a coincidence or if you guys are getting your labels done at the same place, but either way they're both beautiful labels. Just thought it was a nice little coincidence that they do look a little bit similar. So let's check the labels and see what details they've given us. So we know that this is single malt London whisky, so English whisky made in London. It says small batch, matured exclusively in ex-bourbon oak casks. We also know that this whisky is non-chill filtered and natural colour. Those are the two things that we really want to see on a label to convince us that it is a craft presentation, and we've got both of those on this whisky here. More than that, we know that this is batch 2, and this particular one is bottle number 1296 out of 2950 bottles. So 2,950 bottles, assuming that those are ASB, American Standard Barrels, which is your standard bourbon barrel, I'm going to guess that's probably around a batch of 10 to 12 bourbon casks, depending on how much spirit they're losing each year to evaporation, which, bearing in mind that this is matured in London, where it's going to be a little bit warmer than it is up there in Scotland, may actually be a little bit higher than the standard 2-3% that you often get quoted from Scotch distilleries. But either way, a release of 2,950 bottles, it really is what I would call small batch. There's a lot of distilleries that like to throw their small batch and limited edition labels around, and it tends to often not mean a lot. But if we've only got 2,950 bottles of this, I'd say that it probably really is a small batch. It's also 52.2% ABV, so that's a really nice high strength, probably a good drinking strength. But either way, we've got a little bit of headroom there to adjust it with a little bit of water if we think it's necessary. And it doesn't actually say on the label or the tube anywhere, but I did contact the distillery and they were kind enough to send me a very prompt response, which is always good. And they told me that this is a roughly 3.5-year-old whisky, and it's matured in first fill bourbon casks from Kelvin Cooperage in Kentucky. So I think that's about all the details anyone needs. Let's get some in the glass and see what it's like. So this is a pretty strong whiskey at 52.2%, but I actually think that it's perfectly drinkable, perfectly noseable and drinkable at full strength. It does swim fairly well, but in my opinion, doesn't actually need it at all. So the first thing that really jumped out at me when I opened this, because I was really surprised with the nose when I first opened it, is quite how fruity it is. I'm getting this really surprising and intense note of ripe, really juicy, sweet tropical fruits. It's almost like something that you would get in a whiskey from Amrit, and I'm wondering if that might be something to do with the temperature that this whiskey is matured at, because like I said, chances are that this is matured at quite a higher temperature than most of the whiskey in Scotland, and obviously the whiskey from Amrit is matured in a very warm climate. So I'm wondering if that might be a reason for that similarity in the fruitiness between those two whiskies. I'm also getting quite a nice musty lemon note, and it's a little bit similar to the sort of thing that I quite often pick up in an American rye whiskey. Also some really nice oaky notes. Now this is a young whiskey, and looking at the colour of it, it's been put into some probably pretty active casks, bearing in mind that it's natural colour. But there's not any excessive oaky, planky, sawdusty or gingery wood spice notes in this at all. It's all kept really well in check. It's a lovely perfumed woodiness, something like polished wood. Also getting a little bit of caramel and peanut brittle, so that's going to be coming from the American white oak that the casks are made of. Really nice woodiness, but never bitter or planky or anything like that. Also, and I suspect this is probably from that floor malted English barley, I'm getting some really nice cereally and shortbread notes, which is something that I'd more often associate with an Irish whiskey, but there's a little bit of that in there, and I quite like it. There is occasionally a little touch of spiciness to the nose, but I'd say it's more of a creamy black pepper note. Definitely not the sort of gingery spiciness that you get from a lot of young whiskies that have been shoved into virgin oak or quarter casks or things like that to speed things up. So let's see how it tastes. On the palate, it's a lovely, full, syrupy, creamy, caramelly flavour. Beautiful coating mouthfeel, and the palate just goes on and on. Really impressed with this one. Also getting some notes of like a sweetened lemon squash and some really nice sweet wood spices. There is a pleasant touch of dry oakiness to the palate of this one, but it always comes back to that sweet and syrupy maltiness. As for the finish, it's all about those sweet and syrupy bourbon notes, mixed with those lovely sweet perfumed oaky notes, and of course mixed with that wonderful English malted barley. And right on the death of it, you do get another little hint of that lingering bitter oak, but it's all very pleasant. So I'm really impressed with this one. If this is the sort of thing that we can expect from Bimber Distillery, I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out for future releases. I think it tastes much, much older than 3.5 years, and despite that young age, there's no harshness or immaturity, and it's perfectly drinkable at the full strength of 52.2. With the English Whisky Company in Rydham, Norfolk being my home distillery, I've tried pretty much everything that they've ever released, including a lot of their early whiskies, their early chaptered releases, which were bottled at around an age of 3 years old. And I would say that this release from Bimber is actually quite a bit better than any of the 3-year-old whiskies that the English Whisky Company were bottling all those years ago. So that's really promising. One of the things that I really like about this whiskey from Bimber, though, is the way that it's not in a Scotch style. And this isn't necessarily a criticism of other distilleries, but I do think that a lot of English distilleries, as well as most of the Japanese distilleries, they do fall into a little bit of a trap in that they really are trying to emulate Scotch. But I don't think that's what's happened here with this release from Bimber. I think that it's a really unique whiskey, and I think it's its own thing, and I think that's a really good thing. And before I forget, I have to give this a grade. I'm going to give it a B+. So thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments what you think of Bimber. Cheers.